Hello and welcome to the Unsung Sport Podcast, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the sports you love. Today I'm joined by former Norwich City and Northern Ireland striker, author and keynote speaker, Paul McVeigh. Paul, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. No problem at all. So, Paul, it'd be great to, just share us a little bit about your story, maybe some of your key highlights from your playing career, any memorable moments and achievements.
Well, it takes me all the way back because it feels like a lifetime ago. I started 30 years ago. Would you believe it's one of those ones where I think about people who have had 30-year careers in anything. Just seems like they should be so old and ready to retire. And I'm 46, just turned 46 last week, and thinking, well, I've probably still got a good 20, 25 years left in me. So, but no, it was. I think the easiest way to sum it up was just saying it was just the most enjoyable experience, as much as it wasn't always easy lots of the times. Having had 6 years starting off at Spurs, you're trying to get into a team against some of the best players in the world, like the Teddy Sherringhams and the David Ginolas and Les Ferdinands and Darren, just like real amazing players to be playing with and competing against to get into the team. But of course, only had a few games playing in the Premier League with Spurs and managed to just get one goal for Spurs in my time there. But really, I probably found my level at Norwich City, and that was the way for me to be able to go on and establish myself as a player in the Championship mostly. And then, of course, we got promoted and back into the Premier League again. And again, just kind of shows you how hard it is, how competitive, how tough, having nearly 20 years of trying to play at the highest level. That I only managed to play 25 games in the Premier League and only scored 2 goals. And, that's me kind of pushing myself and being the best that I could be. And of course, the route that I've gone down after I've stopped playing is all around mindset and psychology. So I had a pretty decent attitude and mindset to get the most out of myself, and yet trying to get to the highest level I could. Still was only 20 games in the Premier League and a couple of goals. So that's why I have just so much respect for the not even just like the best players, not like your Ronaldos or like your Ryan Giggs, the people who have played the most and have won the most ever in that league, but just anyone who's able to sustain a career, over 400 or 500 games. And it just is so difficult to do. So I really do take my hat off there, all those, players who have managed to achieve that. But honestly, it was the most enjoyable, but also the most challenging thing to do for nearly 20 years.
Yeah, but that must have been an incredible high, just scoring your first goal in the Premier League. No one will take that away from you. What was that like?
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things where I actually was talking about this recently when it was actually Teddy Sheringham who hit the free kick. It was a free kick about 25 yards outside the box, and for him to try and bend the top left corner, and the goalkeeper, the Coventry goalkeeper, who kind of dived across, tried to get it, hit the post, and literally just bounced a couple of yards in front of the goal line. So I just had to nip in and nodded it, from like 2 yards into an empty net. So probably the easiest Premier League goal in history. But it was the fact that, you've worked your entire career at that point. It was what I'd been at Spurs for 3 years, obviously all the years when you're growing up as a kid and all that hard work and effort you've put in to get your first goal. But I suppose what nobody tells you until you do score your first goal in the Premier League is, how do you celebrate? I had no idea. So I kind of just was like running away towards the 35,000 fans that were screaming and just waiting for the likes of Teddy and Sol Campbell and Darren Anderton and people like that to try and run across to me and surround me and celebrate with me. But yeah, it's really funny. Really funny.
You didn't practice a backflip or knee slides, anything like that, no?
I don't think I even managed, the thought of scoring. That was the last thing on my mind. It was more just going out and trying your best and getting in position, holding the ball up, make sure every time I got the ball, just play Teddy, or, make sure I was kind of keeping hold of it. There's just so many other aspects and things to think about when you're making your debut. Even just the nerves, playing in front of that 35,000, 40,000 people at White Hart Lane.
Yeah.
Was just so nerve wracking. And then of course I had my dad over from Ireland. You're playing in front of all your fellow professionals and teammates and all the guys who come through the youth team with you. So many things to think about, and the last thing I was thinking is what I do when I celebrate.
Fair enough, fair enough. And I know obviously you went on as obviously a professional, getting your first international call up. What was that like, taking the call, and how does it happen? Is it a text? Is it a call?
No, so back in the 90s, that was actually a letter. There was a letter sent to the club. So it was my manager at the time, Jerry Francis, who obviously was former England captain. So, guy with complete huge credibility in the international arena. For him to tell me that, I'd been called up to play for Northern Ireland was just amazing, because again, it was one of those things in life that, similar to the goal, I wasn't expecting to score on my home debut, so I didn't know how to celebrate. But also, as I was coming through as a young player, all the way through the kind of the schoolboy setup, the youth team setup, even into the senior team, I just was never one of the better players. There was always players who were doing better, playing in the first team before me, getting picked ahead of me. So I was actually quite the way down the ranks of the international team. So I just didn't think I would get a call up, and actually got a call up against Canada. I managed to come on, and I didn't quite score on my debut, but it was essentially given as an own goal. But the ball was crossed in from the left hand side, and I slid in at the near post, and I think that I hit the ball off the defender, and it went in as an own goal. So back in those days, it was given as an own goal. It wasn't. Today, it
Yeah.
probably would have been my goal because it was going in, but I hit the defender. But what can you do?
No, you'll count that one in your head. That sort of
Yeah,
matters.
in my head.
So how did your experiences as a sort of professional footballer shape your perspective on the game and life beyond football?
That's a really good question, actually, and it's also quite profound, I think, in terms of just the insights that it gives you to not just life but people. It's really fascinating whenever you have this experience of being a professional athlete for nearly 20 years, because I think one of the first things you realize is that you understand how people are around you and what people want from you. And it's amazing that this, professional football environment it's very attractive and intoxicating for a lot of people for lots of reasons, from everything from the fame to the kind of probably the glamorous side of it, to the money, to the status, and all of these things that kind of come along, and they're obviously all the things that you don't go into football for. It's generally for the love of the game, because you're probably good at it, because you enjoy the goals or winning things. But all those things that happen, you end up becoming very probably quite defensive with people, because lots of people are wanting things. Can you get me tickets? Can you get me a shirt? Can you speak to your friend? Can you get me into Man United? Can you get me into a club? Whatever it is, there's so many things people ask for you. So you actually have quite a good antennae for understanding people. So I suppose ultimately what you do is you really become pretty good pretty quickly at working out people. So that's one of the great skills you get from it. Of course, there's all of the other skill sets you build, like that hard work ethic, and the determination, and the resilience that you'll just naturally build up because of the huge disappointment. So I suppose I need to counter the first question of, it was such an amazing experience for 20 years, but that doesn't mean it was all good.
Yeah.
There's so many low points, and real obstacles and roadblocks that been able to try and deal with them, and really search within yourself that, do you actually have what it takes to get over those challenges, is again a great way of understanding yourself. And I suppose one of the last parts of it is, and why I think it's a little bit more profound, is you almost live your life back to front. And what I mean by that is that you start off, and at 16, I left Ireland and pretty much came across with a suitcase. But within 2 years, I'd made my Premier League debut, and then suddenly you're getting six-figure contracts from Tottenham Hotspur, and then suddenly you're driving a really nice car and living in a nice place, and then of course you do that consistently over nearly 20 years, and I suppose what it teaches you is that when you have lots of the things that a lot of people would consider almost are the hallmark or the trademark of success, like cars and houses and material stuff, and yet you realize that actually it doesn't make any difference to your happiness. It doesn't impact how content you might be in your life. And actually, all it does is probably highlight if you aren't happy in life and you have money, it probably highlights that you're not happy. But if you are happy and content, fulfilled with your life, and you have these material things, then you probably magnify that happiness and able to share it with other people. So, and of course, because the majority of people in life, and I'm not saying this as a judgment, more that an observation, that lots of people, go through their teenage years, get an education, might go to college, start their career, start building up through their career, try and maybe get a house, get a mortgage, until eventually you might get the 50, 60 paid off, and you've kind of, that's your lot in life. And yet you kind of have that in your early 20s as a professional athlete. And suddenly it's like, wow, what's next in life? Because I've kind of done lots of the life goals that most people are working 30, 40 years on.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had, excuse me, we've had Guy Branston on recently. He said a very similar thing, like at that point where, yeah, there's kind of lots of hangers on. You don't realize that until that playing career stops and your circle of friends really shrinks. And also Paul McGuinness from Manchester United, who's one of the coaches there, was just saying like how much people are, especially now, how too much too soon can really damper the hunger, and actually kind of flips to being a professional thing, to being much more, oh, look at me, I've got all this, and it becomes a bit of a competition almost. So yeah, it can really change from your original outset of what you wanted to do.
Yeah, and I guess that's life, isn't it? You might have a starting point and you might have an idea of where you want to go, but generally things aren't straightforward, and success, it generally isn't in a straight line. And so navigating all of these challenges in life again just adds to why it was so fascinating, so interesting, in all of the developments and how you evolve as a person as you go through that career.
Yeah. And so am I right in saying that you moved from that football career into sports psychology? Was that your next step after football?
No, I actually went straight into the corporate world. So
Okay.
it was one of those things where I'd stopped playing at 32. I was again back to just feeling how fortunate and blessed I was that I got a second spell at Norwich City and I'd won another league title, and I just thought this is a great opportunity for me to call it a day. I'm fit, I'm healthy, it's my decision. I could have gone on and got another contract somewhere else after winning the league with Norwich City under Paul Lambert, and I just thought the psychological benefits of me stepping away from football to then go and explore whatever else I was going to do in life. And then once I started, looking into it and the kind of person I am, I'll do my research. I'll have a really good look around to see what the options are, and the kind of the benefits of whatever path I was going to take. And I just saw that there was a massive gap in the market in terms of no one had ever played in the Premier League or even in professional football and gone down this route of keynote speaking, which I didn't even know what keynote speaking was until I started, speaking to people. And actually our former sports psychologist, a guy called Gavin Drake, he had a corporate training company that the one day he was working with us in Norwich City, the other 4 days he was delivering programs for Coca-Cola and Volvo and the NHS and, companies around the world. And so working with Gavin really opened my eyes to this possibility of I could take this experience and insights of playing at the top level in England and then going on and sharing that with the corporate world. And to be able to do that for the last 15 years has just been such a pleasure, because effectively, I've been paid to kick a ball around with my friends for nearly 20 years until I got to 32. And now I get paid to talk about all the stuff I did kicking a ball around with my friends. So it's such a, it just feels so lucky in life to be able to have this second career on top of what I was already thought was the best career in the world.
Yeah. And before we came on air here, I know we were talking about you were recently in Middle East. I mean, I guess this role takes you all across the world.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things that the insights and the experiences and the expertise that you've built up over nearly 30 years now, you're able to share this because ultimately, from my background, it's all about performance. Doesn't really matter what else is happening, outside of the stadium, in your home life, in your personal life, whatever else is going on. Once you get onto the field, it's all about performance. And so because that's so desirable to lots of people in the corporate world, they want to see how do you perform at that highest level? Because let's be honest, and the reason why I say that I was very fortunate to get to the pinnacle of what I would consider the most ruthless and the most competitive industry in the world, is just because of the sheer number of people who wanted to do it.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't just people like me growing up in Belfast who, you know, wanted to be professional footballers. Obviously, all over Ireland, you had players who wanted to be there. And of course, we didn't want to be professional footballers in Ireland, you know, like your Roy Keanes and your Damien Duffs and your Robbie Keanes and your people. We all wanted to move to England to go and play in the best league in the world. And then, of course, it's not just around the UK and Ireland. You've got people from all over Europe, all over the world. And you just think of the millions and billions of kids who wanted to do what we did. And that's why I really think it's, you know, you're at the very highest level of performance. But from my side, I then say, okay, well, there's so many things that are going to impact performance, you know, from your technical ability to your physicality to your nutrition to recovery and everything else. But I suppose the area that I most passionate about, most enthusiastic about, was all around mindset and psychology. You know, because I just see that as the biggest difference in the elite performers, the people who I played with who had so much more ability than me, probably more ability in their little toe than I had in my entire body, and yet didn't have a career for lots of different reasons, but mostly down to their mindset and psychology. So to be able to take those lessons and those insights and then be able to share them into the corporate world is just so applicable. And then of course you've got a huge area on leadership. You know, after, let's say, 200 or 300 games of playing, suddenly become one of the leaders in the team. So then being able to share that of what that really takes and what that means. And then of course you're in a team environment for 20 years. And of course, pretty much every corporate entity is just filled with teams and all falling up into the kind of top team, their senior leadership team. So to be able to work from, you know, the sort of the lowest level in the corporate structure all the way up to the senior leadership team is, I'm just very fortunate that lots of people are really interested in what we do.
Yeah, definitely. I know within your book, The Stupid Footballer is Dead, you discuss mental toughness. Can you kind of elaborate on what that means to you and I guess how that transitions into that corporate world?
Yeah, well, there's so many elements, you know, and again, it's language is a big part of it, you know. So depending on whether you call it mental toughness, you know, resilience, attitude, I actually call it mental performance. And I think the reason why I describe it, or at least say it's mental performance, is because, you know, you must be aware of the four corner model that the English FA described in terms of how they want to improve their players going forward. So, you know, the amount of research in terms of if we can improve our players technically and physically and psychologically and from a social side. So all of those different areas are all different areas of performance. So if you're talking about technical, tactical, or physical, but then of course the psychological is, it almost, it evokes a really kind of strong emotion when you talk about psychology or psychological or seeing a psychologist or anything in that ballpark. So I just try and take that language out of it and talk about mental performance. You know, what are you doing in here that's going to allow you to go and achieve whatever it is you want? Now, that could be on a football field, that could be in the office, in your career, in your home life, with your family, relationships, you know, from a health and well-being perspective. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Because I honestly think that all of those other aspects are hugely important: the technical side, the physical side, how you deal with the social side of what you're doing. But actually, like for instance, I've just finished training in the gym here. The only reason why I went into the gym today is because I've been away from the office for 9 days, speaking in America, speaking in the Middle East. And when I come in, the last thing I wanted to do today was go and train. Because I'm absolutely shattered from traveling for 9 days. First day back in the office has been so full on, catching up on emails, calls, meetings, etc. And the only reason why I've ended up training is because in my mind, I'm like, no matter what, I need to train today. I'm tired. I'm really, really sort of, you know, at my kind of low energy levels. But in my mind, it was just a no brainer. I needed to do it. So again, that is why the mental performance. So yes, then when I go in, yes, it's down to my physicality, but it only happens because of my decision in my head that this is what I want to do, which is why, you know, I think it's the single biggest differential in elite performers.
Yeah, you're making me feel very guilty now that I shouldn't need to go down the gym after this.
And again, that's what you think. It's all down to how you think about it. You could either feel guilty because you haven't trained today, or you can say, do you know what? I'm not bothered. I don't care. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. And again, because that's straight away, that's part of mental performance, comparing yourself to others. And again, whether that's a good thing, people use it as a motivating factor. People can also use it as a way to actually demotivate themselves and go, oh, I'm comparing myself to that guy who's training 6 days a week. I'm not good enough. Because actually, one training session a week could be actually success for some people. Back to how we think about it.
Yeah. Okay, maybe I'll go back to one then. And I know there's that mental toughness of kind of talking to yourself as well, but I think that in sports, setbacks we know happen. Certainly, as you say, that elite football, and you probably know footballers that have had the coaches that have told them they're not good enough. I mean, Declan Rice is the big example of Chelsea saying he's not good enough. Chelsea have said that to a lot of players, to be honest. They've gone on and done some great things. But how does an athlete really how do they build that mental resilience in the face of those challenges and setbacks?
I suppose it's when you're thinking about, like, from a player's perspective, if it's an actual being told they're not good enough or they're not what the club is looking for, that's probably one scenario that would need almost like a mindset, or almost like a way of rationalizing why that's not necessarily the end of the road. And the way that I thought about it, because, what happened to Declan Rice happened to me and happened to loads of people. It's happened constantly for, for generations and decades, players just not being appreciated at certain clubs and going somewhere else and suddenly being the best player around or being very successful. And the way that I dealt with it was that I only needed one player. Sorry, I only needed one coach in the whole of professional football to like me.
Yeah.
Now, when I put it like that, that doesn't seem like a huge challenge. That actually seems very doable. I need one coach in the whole of professional football to like me and give me a chance. And obviously, very fortunate, whenever I was at Spurs, it was Jerry Francis. But out of all of the managers who were at Tottenham Hotspur at the time, from Ozzy Ardiles to Jerry Francis to George Graham to Christian Gross to David Plate, there was so many managers who didn't like me, but I just needed one, and Jerry Francis allowed me to play 3 times. And then, of course, I went to Norwich City, and then we had a manager called Brian Hamilton, who's actually a former Northern Ireland manager. And again, he brought me into the club, but he didn't play me. So yes, he gave me an opportunity, but didn't give me an opportunity in the first team. And then Nigel Worthing came in. And so again, took a little bit of time, but then finally got him on side. So then one manager liked me, and that happened for nearly 7 years. So again, and then when you leave Norwich City, I'm thinking, right, who are, out of all the managers in the entire football pyramid, who could like me? And so it was Kevin Blackwell down at Luton Town. And then, of course, then I went back to Norwich City. So again, one person to like you doesn't seem, insurmountable. So that's from a if you're getting released from a club. But then in terms of, day-to-day training, an incident at a match, having an opportunity and not scoring it, that's just down to the meaning you give it. That's really the ability to reframe, and probably the best players are actually the best at that, because you could take someone like, who did I really admire as a striker over the last sort of decade in the Premier League? Maybe someone like Aguero. Great example, just so unbelievably good, such a great striker, scored so many goals for Man City. But did he score every opportunity he had? No. What happens whenever he went to score, missed, didn't hit the target, or the keeper saved it, or whatever, just moved on. So he didn't beat himself up because he'd missed this opportunity, because that's what the best players do. They're just moving on and constantly looking for that one opportunity, because you don't need to have 15 opportunities. You just need that one opportunity and you take it. So again, that's a reframing thing, that really it's what's your expectations. It's like a kid going out to try and play a game and gives the ball away and then throws the hands up in the air and starts, all these kind of demonstrations, and you think, well, what's your expectations? What player in the world has ever played the perfect game every time? Probably no one. Yeah. So again, what is your expectations compared to what actually happens is a very, very easy way to move on from mistakes.
Yeah. I've got an 11-year-old boy, so I do see that mindset, and it's like even when you lose, it's a learn. You've got to do it as a learn. So yeah, just reframing it. You're not going to win every game, and in fact, if you do win every game, what do you actually learn in that?
Absolutely. And again, if you can take, and you, without trying to make it into a complete, philosophical exercise, but if you can understand that, yes, there's a competitive side to it, but there's also a learning side, but there's also an enjoyment side, and there's actually just a social side where you're just playing with your friends. And so all of these things that actually, and probably as you've just mentioned, as a father, you're probably just wanting them just to become, more well-rounded, and you've got teamwork in there, you've got hard work, you've got showing up, asked to do something maybe you don't want to do, maybe they move position, maybe they don't play. So what all of these things are, just it's great ways to build character and help people learn. And it doesn't have to be your 11-year-old son. It can be a 32-year-old seasoned professional who could still equally respond in the least helpful way when these same challenges happen.
Yeah, I guess as being a former Premier League striker yourself, that kind of loss in confidence that we talk about with strikers obviously gets amplified a huge amount as well. I mean, by 100 or more. How do you approach working with an athlete that is experiencing performance anxiety or that type of pressure? And also, I guess that does equate equally to the corporate world of somebody who's underperforming, and they just that pressure builds and they lose confidence in themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's probably goes back to understanding A, what confidence is, B, actually how to keep hold of it, and either remember that it's all within you. It's all internal. And this is the thing that, I think lots of people, whenever I was actually working as a sports psych for 7 years with a couple of Premier League clubs, and it was amazing that was the number one thing that the best players would come in and see me about, was their confidence. And it's really fascinating because you're thinking, these guys are at the top of their game, they're pretty much, as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And yet they're coming in to see me about their confidence. And the conversation would go something like this, generally, and without turning this into a session and asking you, so I'll ask it rhetorically, do you think they'd come in and see me after they just had their best game ever, or whenever they've just had an absolute nightmare and not a good performance? And of course it was the latter, whenever they've had a really poor performance and feeling a bit down, but kind of beating themselves up, and they come in, they're like, kind of need some help with my confidence, and I'd be like, can't help you. Generally they'd be saying, well, why are we paying you, what's the point of you being here? But it was also because I can't give them confidence. And this is probably why I love psychology so much, that just the whole essence and understanding what confidence is and where it comes from. Because obviously we know lots of people struggle with it, but in my understanding of the field of psychology is just a simple way of saying how we actually function as humans is that we're constantly thinking all the time, whether it's during this session or this call, whether we're reacting to whether you've hit your goals or not, whether you've had a good day at work, whether you've had a good trip, whatever it is, we're constantly thinking. And how we think, again, this is not my research, this is just understanding the field of psychology, how we think drives our feelings. So all of our entire emotional experience is based on what's happening in our heads. And in my opinion, confidence is an emotion. So like if I was feeling confident, I'd walk onto the pitch and I'd be feeling confident, ready to play. Or of course the opposite could be, I could walk onto the pitch feeling really unconfident. But ultimately it's how I feel.
Mm.
So if I understand that actually my confidence is dictated by how I feel, and every emotion I experience is based on how I think. So that's it. So really, you have to ask yourself, the question is, how or what are you doing to allow yourself to feel confident?
Yeah.
And generally what happens is most people are tying themselves up in knots in their heads because they're not feeling confident because something happened and they've given a certain meaning to it. That means they've then started going down this road of feeling less confident. So it is just a matter of being able to try and turn the meaning around, and obviously what it's called in a psychological aspect is just reframing. But ultimately, it's just the meaning that we're given to things that happen in life. And we'll decide whether that helps us feel more confident, or because a certain scenarios happened, we'll then decide that we feel less confident. But we don't realize that it's us.
Yeah. So how can, I'm not even going to say sports person now, but how can anybody kind of combat that overthinking? Because that's typically, I'm assuming that's typically what it is. I think when, maybe you have too much time to go into any sort of process that it's something just, yeah, you're overthinking things that makes it more complicated and it doesn't quite work.
Yeah, so again, lots of people will sort of tie themselves up in knots, or almost like ending up in this kind of downward spiral of how we might be able to think of what's going wrong and how that's then going to affect. And almost what people do is they either are living in the past or living in the future, and less about living in the present. So again, that's a big way of stop looking back, stop looking ahead, and actually just focusing on what they can do, which I'm sure you've heard a million times. And so what's really fascinating about it is that this is not rocket science.
Mhm.
And this is where I've heard a phrase, lots of times over the years about knowledge is power. And I actually disagree, because I think that it's applied knowledge is power. And once you know that actually this is what you need to do, as opposed to start thinking back of all the times when it went wrong before, which is probably why you're adding to why you feel less confident. And I'm thinking about what might happen if I go into this scenario again, which is probably why you're thinking. I'm more about, well, what can you think about now that's going to help you? So in my case, a really, really simple way from actually building my own confidence, as well as building the confidence of the Premier League players I was working with, was just something simple like, let's watch a video of you really playing well. Because
Yeah.
instead of thinking about all the things that went wrong or all the things that you think might not work out, let's actually look at you performing at a really high level. And I'll tell you what, it's really hard for a player to watch themselves performing at their highest, possible level of performance, and then come away from that 2 minute or 5 minute video and come away thinking I'm a terrible player.
Yeah.
Because all it is just, what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on all the things that went wrong, or are you focusing on all the things that went wrong? Right. Are you focusing on all the things that might stop you from performing, or are you focusing on all the things that might help you perform at the level that generally you can do? Because that's there's a reason why they're professionals. There's a reason why they're at a certain club, because they are capable of doing it. But we're also very, we're all human. We're all just having slight dips in confidence. Some people will have probably a bigger dip than others, but again, it comes back to their level of mental performance.
Yeah. Going back to when you said you was doing that within a club, was that at Norwich you were doing that?
I did. I had 2 years at Norwich City and 5 years at Crystal Palace. I was working. So that was from when I stopped playing in 2010 all the way through to 2017. So it's really fascinating, because some of the players that I worked with over those years have actually gone on and done unbelievably well. So, and I'm obviously not saying this is down to me, just in terms of it's so good to see the players that you work with when they were younger. Like, for instance, we worked with Jacob Murphy, who's at Newcastle United.
Yeah.
So again, you talked about the players getting too much too soon, and we actually got to the FA Youth Cup final with Norwich City, and as Norwich City's entire youth team cost £0 to put together, and the Chelsea team that they played in the final, or we played in the final, was actually, I think it cost about 5 million
Yeah.
just from the youth team. So they had people like Nathan Ake and Loftus Cheek and people like that who were already fantastic players. But the fact we had, people like Carlton Morris, who plays up front for Luton Town in the Premier League, and Jacob Murphy, who's in Newcastle United. Those guys were in the Norwich team, and we managed to beat Chelsea home and away in the FA Youth Cup final. And then again, working with players at Crystal Palace like Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Tyreek Mitchell, whenever they were coming through, and seeing just, obviously Aaron's got like signed at United for like 50 million, and Tariq's now played, the last sort of 2 or 3 years in the Crystal Palace first team, just made his England debut. So it's just so, I'm just so pleased for these guys to be able to see that they've gone on and had, really, really successful careers, because obviously the percentage of players that come through the youth team who do go on is so small.
And what's the kind of age of players that you would work with in a professional club? I mean, how far down the kind of youth ranks would you speak to players?
Whenever I was working, when I was actually officially working at clubs, as I said, the 2 years at Norwich City was just with the youth team, so 16 to 18. And then when I was at Crystal Palace, it was 16 to 22, 23. So it was that kind of level in between. They've just arrived at the club and just before they got to the first team. But it was in 2017 when I actually just finished my master's in psychology. It was one of the things that I just thought it would help me in terms of my ability to explain what I've done, what I would suggest, and my philosophy of helping players. So I did my master's and finished in 2017, but I decided to come away from the whole world of professional football in terms of on an official capacity, just because it was getting to a point where I was doing so much speaking for companies, and it just was starting to take me around the world, whether it was in the US or across Europe or in the Middle East or even in the Asia. I've gone over speaking in Thailand, Singapore, Hong Kong, places like that. And it just got to the point where being at a certain club, every week was almost like hampering where I really wanted to go with all of my keynote speaking work. And so again, even though I stopped working as a kind of, in an official capacity over the last 6-7 years now, I've just been working with individual players when I've kind of been, had those conversations with either the agent or the player that someone's recommended me to them, has just reached out and I'm just having that almost like personal relationship with them so we can have our conversations, on a virtual call like this.
Yeah. And when you're going to speak to companies, I mean, what sort of size companies, what sort of levels of people do you speak to? Is it just sort of the management, or actually do you speak to much broader than that?
Yeah, no, so it completely varies. Honestly, it's gone from, for instance, say this year I spoke with PwC. They had their graduates, so they've got 250 graduates who are just joining the company. And again, speaking to someone at that level, you're talking in a certain way, giving them a certain, suppose, set of information that'll be really applicable for people at the start of their careers. And what's really interesting for me is how our business has evolved. That for 10 years, from 2010 2020, I was essentially delivering lots of one-off keynotes, for big companies like, I don't know, Microsoft, Cisco, Deutsche Bank, whoever it is. It was lots of one-off sessions. And then because COVID happened and because this, I suppose, this need to be able to try and evolve and change what I did. So we now actually deliver leadership programs to pretty much some of the biggest companies in the world, whether they're in the UK, Europe, the US, but essentially it's working with their very senior leadership teams. So it's almost like their executive committees or their boards or their SLTs, but it's working with them over more like 9, 12, 18 months, which allows us to be able to have a much more, or gives us a greater chance to impact and sustain what we're doing and how do we actually embed this in their culture rather than doing a one-off session that lasts 45, 60 minutes. So yeah, it's fascinating for me because not only have I got that ability to be able to go in and speak to a big room of people, whether there's 500,000 people or whatever, but now we have the chance to go and work with the people who are running the entire company and then how they're going to influence the 40, 50, 70,000 staff, across the world. So yeah, really fascinating, Mark. I never thought this is what I'd be doing.
Yeah.
From 15 years ago, I literally thought this is a great opportunity to go and share some of what I've learned from a sport and background and do it in a corporate environment and to be able to go and deliver, leadership programs with, a multinational company is yeah, I have to pinch myself sometimes.
So is the plan to be selling out arenas like Tony Robbins and Les Brown and those kind of guys?
Do you know what? It's really interesting because it really depends what you like and how you like to do it. For me, I have I love the variety. That's probably the biggest thing. I just love the variety. So for instance, I've just been speaking to a client today who are having a conference in Las Vegas for 700 people. And so to go and do an event, for 700 people in Vegas will be like one type of session or event or style that I'll need to deliver in. Whereas a couple of months ago, I had the senior leadership team from a big marketing company, big US marketing company here based in New York. and they flew everybody, actually, even though it's a global company, they flew everybody to London, and we did a session, but there was only 15 people in the room. But again, the event that you'll do for 700 people is one type of session and one type of way of delivering,
Right.
but equally as interesting and fascinating and also enjoyable for me is being able to go and deliver a session for the start of a program for 15 people who then you can then, build on over the coming months and really deepen those relationships and get to know people, because ultimately that's what we're doing. It's about how do you help people improve and sustain what they're already doing.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about there how the kind of field's evolved over the last, how many years you've been doing it. What changes do you see coming up in the future?
I think the biggest thing that I've seen recently, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, and especially kind of COVID probably had the biggest impact, was that I think companies are investing more and more in their people. Mm-hmm. I think what happened before was it was probably a nice to have, that companies would, do like an annual offsite or an annual conference, and they might bring in a speaker, or they might bring in a well-being expert or something along those lines. And I think not only have you had the whole change from hybrid working, but you've got this, obviously, of course, the Gen Z and everybody coming through about, it's not just about delivering that bottom line anymore. People are actually choosing the company that they want to go and work for based on the opportunities, how they develop people, what's the value system of that organization. Yeah. So whenever you think, well, actually, if a company really invests in their people, they're more likely to retain them, more likely to develop them. That individual is going to be more likely to be loyal to the organization, which again, all just bodes for a more successful business. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. The companies, it used to be a nice to have, and now it's, we really, really need to develop and invest in our people.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree more. I think the one thing I think that when you're looking at that peak performance and you're as a company, those high performers or in any sports club, there's that balance between peak performance and burnout and employee or player well-being. How does that balance?
Very tough. Absolutely. Just I think that's there's no easy answer to it. It's very tough, because I think probably one of the other trends that I've seen a lot of is that, companies want their people and their staff to kind of do more faster, generally with less resources. So again, it's almost like it's probably a very difficult mix to try and keep that, ability to perform consistently over a long term. But actually, that's probably why I think it's so applicable to what we do, because I had to perform at the highest level for 20 years in a sporting context, but that doesn't mean that I was peak performing every day. Mm-hmm. That just means that when the time was right, we had to get to that level. Now, whether that's physically, technically, mentally, emotionally, whatever it was. But the difference is, and probably what the corporate world could really learn from, especially football or any other sport, is all about recovery and recuperation. And again, that's from not just the physical side, but the mental side and the emotional side. So again, what is the organization doing to allow people so that they don't burn out? As opposed to, right, you just finished that 3-month project and you've been burning the midnight oil, every weekend for the last 3 months, right? Finished, brilliant. We got it over the line, got the contract. That's brilliant. Okay, here's your next one. And it starts on Monday morning, see another 3. Yeah. It's like, it's just not possible. Just humans aren't made to work like that, or we're not built to be able to just consistently peak perform. It's all about the peaks and troughs and having the cycles of when you can and when you actually need to recover.
Yeah, great stuff. I guess looking back at your own journey, what do you consider to be the most significant learning experience?
Oh, goodness me. Like, it's literally, there are hundreds, if not thousands. Good question. I think I'll have to go back to the probably the first moment when I was aware of just how powerful my mindset could be, because I didn't realize it at the time, but I definitely had the almost like the blinkers removed, and that was I was only 17, So it was 1995. I was in my second year at Totteham Hotspur.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I suppose I didn't realize, but I definitely had an inferiority complex. So coming across from Ireland, just, being around lots of Londoners, and they don't know how often, that happens for anyone listening or anyone who knows, but I just felt they were always so confident. And we just talked about confidence earlier. They were confident, they were flash, they were brash, they were, just seemed like they just oozed this kind of aura that I just never ever thought I could get close to. So because of that, whether it was my accent, whether it was because I was always the smallest player in the team, but it definitely had some sort of inferiority complex. And I remember reading this book, a friend of mine gave me, called Awaken the Giant Within. It was a guy called Tony Robbins, like you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading that book as a 17-year-old, and it was just a complete game changer, but also B, it had so many key messages and so many things that I started to plan in my life, like goal setting and understanding psycholinguistics, and how, my own language and my own self-talk will impact, what I believe about myself. But ultimately, the best lesson I took from it was stop looking outside of yourself, because everything you'll ever need, you've already got within. Mm-hmm. And for a 17-year-old kid to hear that and read that, it was just like, blew me away. And so being able to learn from that book, and then also have the ability to apply those lessons, not just to my professional career, but also to my personal life, was, I think that was the greatest lesson that I'd learned over the last 30 years.
Yeah. He's an absolute powerhouse, Tony Robbins, isn't he?
Yeah. And again, there's a reason why he's the most successful entrepreneur in that whole field of personal development. There's so many successful people in that field, but he's a self-made billionaire now. And again, this just shows the cycle of life. That I read that book when I was 17, and whenever I finished playing in 2010, one of the first things I did was got on a plane to LA and went on one of his courses, his Unleash the Power Within course, for 4 days in LA. So that was in July of that year, 2010. And then when I decided and made the commitment that I wanted to be a professional speaker, I went to America again, went on a speaking course, and stayed in Tampa, Florida, an apartment in Tampa, Florida, with another guy who was at the start of his speaking journey. And so for a week, we shared this beachfront apartment while we were attending this course. And his name was Jarek Robbins, who was Tony Robbins' son.
Oh, wow.
You just, you really can't write this stuff. It just, talk about the circle of life and just how these things happen and stars align. And amazingly, actually just texted me last week. I'm still in touch with them and good friends with them now. And just, having that understanding of someone who's, growing up with Tony Robbins as your dad, you can imagine just what an incredible human being Jarek is as well.
Yeah, geez, that's some big shoes to fill, though.
Yeah. 6'6" Tony Robbins is, but Jarek's about 6'4" as well. So it's, as you can imagine, I'm looking up at him every single day. It was a lot of
fun. If you could give a piece of advice to yourself now, back to your kind of 17-year-old self, what would that be?
17. Don't worry, because girls will like you. It probably took me about 10 years from 17 until I got to about 27 before I finally realized, I think there's something that works with the opposite sex, but I think it's just the accent. It only seemed to be the accent that seemed to just really ears you prick up whenever you're out and about. And this is the funny thing, whenever you then, get to travel the world across over the last 30 years, whether it's through football or all the speaking stuff, it's amazing now. And in America, just whenever I was speaking over there, one of the first things people come up and say to you afterwards, actually funny, these two ladies actually come up after I spoke in America, and the girl come up, she must be, 45, 46, something like that. And she just come up and she just high-fived me and went, congrats on the accent, man.
You've been working on it.
And I'm like, it's the greatest gift my parents gave me.
The Irish charm, eh? The Irish charm.
Yeah. Well, at least the Irish accent.
So again, just in terms of any particular sort of, just to round off, what messages or lessons would you like our listeners here to take away from the work?
Well, listen, I generally start most sessions that I deliver, any kind of keynote speeches, whether it's, just about to put one out today for a delivery I did for Rolls-Royce, or whether it's for, whoever it is, financial services firms, the stadiums, whoever it is you're speaking to. And I generally start the session by saying, I literally feel like the luckiest guy in the world. And people can probably assume that there's a reason why I feel like the luckiest guy in the world, because I got to play, professional football for 20 years. And obviously, now I have been traveling the world, speaking to companies and getting paid to speak about playing professional football. But the point why I say it is because you don't have to be a professional footballer or have been paid to speak about your professional football career to feel like you're the luckiest person in the world. And so the very, very quick follow-up question is, could every single person in this room feel like the luckiest person in the world? And the answer is yes. Because ultimately that's just down to how you appreciate your life and how you view your life. And that's really just about how much gratitude you have. So if you wake up in the morning and think, my life's terrible, my life's a mess, it's really hard, it's going to be probably a pretty tough day. If you wake up in the morning like really grateful for my health, and really grateful for my family or friends, or they've got a roof over me, whatever it is you're grateful for, very, very quickly you're going to feel like you're the luckiest person in the world. And that's free and anybody can do it. So yeah, if anybody wants to try it, I would highly recommend it.
Cool. Great stuff. Well, I've got to ask you one last thing as well. Who do you support? Who's your football team?
I always look out for Spurs and Norwich. That's the big thing. And ironically, nearly all of my former teams were playing in the Premier League this year, from Spurs, Norwich, Luton Town, Burnley. We're all in the Premier League. Unfortunately, Norwich aren't there. But I kind of say it doesn't really have the same affection, or you don't think about it in the same way when you've been a professional player. Right. And the reason why I say that is because, like, my two brothers are Liverpool fans. And I said it's only because Liverpool haven't turned around and told you to go away that you still love them. Now, they're not always the happiest people in the world. They'll have their ups and downs based on how the club's doing, but they'll still love Liverpool and still have that affinity with them. Whereas, like, I had 6 years at Spurs and I loved being there until they went, okay, you can go away now. Yeah. And then I went to Norwich City and had 7-8 years there, and they went, okay, you can go away now. Same with Luton, same with Burnley. Again, with Norwich is probably the second time room is the only one whenever I said, okay, I'm going to leave, as opposed to they told me to go away. So yeah, it's interesting how you think about it as a player.
Fair enough. And Paul, how can people find you online?
Yeah, so the big social for me is LinkedIn. If you just go on there and search my name, hopefully it'll come up at the top. But also on socials like Instagram or X, not Twitter, X. I'm just Paul McVeigh 77. So again, even though I look like a 14-year-old child, I'm actually 46. So I was born in 1977. So it's pretty easy to remember.
Yeah, it's a shame we're the same age, but when I look at us side by side here, it's making me feel bad. So on that note, Paul, I'll put all the links in the description. Thank you very much for coming on to the show today. And thank you for being an unsung hero of sport.
Pleasure, Mark. Good to speak with you.
Thank you, my friend. Speak to you soon.